That is the prosecution's opening statement regarding Stacey Stanley, the second victim that was abducted by Shawn Grate, taken to his horrible house of horrors, and then murdered and raped brutally, where she was later found. Right now, we are listening to the opening statement where the attorney is laying out the roadmap of the moments leading up to her disappearance and how that happened, how she had a flat tire, how her son helped her locate someone to help her change it. She had a spare tire in the car, and lo and behold, Shawn Grate, the defendant, was walking by towards the Circle K and struck up a conversation with her. By the time the son's friend came to switch out the tire, that's when he noticed this gentleman, Shawn Grate, the defendant, there with him, and figured it was a friend and didn't think much of it. He fixed the tire, he went on his way, they went inside to get coffee, and then disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. And then that's when the missing persons investigation happened soon after that. With me is criminal defense attorney Gary Gerstenfield out of Maryland. Gary, are you there and can you hear me?
Yes, I am. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. There you are on the screen. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
You know, we're listening to this opening statement, and it's a pretty rough, gruesome case. I mean, the prosecution must be having a field day trying this because, I mean, it's a slam dunk case. It's a death penalty case that we have right now. Why wasn't there a plea deal? I mean, he's so guilty. He was caught red-handed. I mean, there's so much linking him to it. So why is he even agreeing to stand trial? Why not plea this out?
Well, that's a good point, because there's two phases. You can plead to the indictment. In other words, you don't have to have a trial, particularly when, as in, for example, in Shawn's case, he actually admitted to the crime and then nevertheless wanted a trial. And that's just because he's, as you pointed out, probably got some serious mental issues. But that being said, the second phase of the trial is determination of whether or not there are sufficient components that would produce the possibility of death penalty.
So is it possible that he just wanted to, he is that sick that he wanted to relive his murders and his crimes? Because he clearly went on a killing spree. I mean, all of this happened in a short time period. I mean, it was the first victim, then the second victim, and then the third victim, and the third victim was in the house with the other two victims decaying in her presence. I mean, is it possible that this guy just, you know, didn't want to take a plea deal because he wanted to relive his accomplishments of murder? Oh, I think, Gary, are you there? Did we lose him? Well, I think we lost him. Okay, we're going to work on getting him back, and we will hopefully have him back after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Law and Crime Network. I'm Carissa Kranz. Right before the break, we're in the middle of a question with our criminal defense attorney and guest, Gary Gerstenfield. Gary, I'm glad you're back. You know, we asked the question and then we lost you and then we had to go to break. So the question that was asked that the viewers, I think, would like to hear the answer to it. And for those just joining us, we're in the Shawn Grate trial. This is the trial out of Ohio where there are 3 women victims. 2 of them were abducted, raped, and murdered. One of them survived, escaped, and that's how we found out about the other 2 and what went on in this house of horrors. So before the break, I asked Gary, why didn't he plea? And is it possible that he didn't plea because he wanted to relive the thrill of the kill, because this is a death penalty trial and it's a pretty gruesome case, so why not take a plea deal to avoid the death penalty?
Often people do take plea deals specifically to avoid the death penalty. So, and that's certainly not unusual, and we see many cases like that where you'll take a life in prison as opposed to, I guess, getting killed. In his case, though, I don't think a plea deal was ever offered. This is, as you pointed out, one of the most horrific cases. These are 3 women, one tortured, sexually assaulted, And she knew she was going to die as the other two women had died. And they knew, and as you said, it's truly a house of horrors. I mean, this is truly an evil and horrible human being. And so certainly worthy of the death penalty. The reason why he probably didn't take a deal is either A, you're right, he wants to just sort of relive the experience, get the attention. He takes pride in what he did. A lot of the times these people that do these kind of crimes, they actually like the fact that they did it. They want the world to know. It's what they do. And so reliving the experience and going over all the details and sitting there and listening to the stuff for him is probably something he actually enjoys. There's a reason to do a plea, though, or rather, one option is even if you're absolutely guilty of all the crime and there's no deal, sometimes you just want to plead to the indictment in an effort to try to show remorse and try to accept responsibility, in an effort to try to show or curry favor in the penalty phase or the death penalty phase. In this case, of course, none of that's happening.
Right. Okay. Those are all good points. And in the indictment, there were 23 counts. And I think you made some good points. If I were the prosecutor in this case, I probably would say, you know what, these facts are so bad, I'm not offering a deal. This guy deserves the death penalty. We don't know if maybe there was no plea deal offered. Maybe he was bored in jail, or maybe he gets the thrill of the kill and that even applies to himself and he doesn't care. I don't know. But we're going to go back into the courtroom and listen to more testimony. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I'm Carissa Kranz, and we are following closely the Shawn Grate trial out of Ohio. Really a gruesome case. I don't think it's enjoyable for us to watch and listen to, or the jurors, or the viewers. It is just that egregious, the facts. The only person that's probably enjoying this is Shawn Grate, the defendant himself, because he's the one that went on a killing spree in a very short time period of abducting women, raping them, and murdering them. The third victim survived. She was heroic in her efforts to escape, call 911, get out of that house of horrors where the other two bodies were decaying with flies and maggots and sex toys. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. It's really that bad. With me is criminal defense attorney Gary. Gary, are you still with me?
I sure am.
Hi, Gary. Okay. During the break, you and I were discussing, I want to hear what the defense could possibly say. I mean, this is such a strong case for the prosecution. I mean, why not try it as a prosecutor? You know you're going to win and have a good conviction rate. If you were the criminal defense attorney in this case, what would you do at opening after the prosecution is done with their opening statements? Would you be able to give an opening statement, or would you just reserve that?
Well, a lot of times when you're a defense attorney, you don't always know exactly how the evidence is going to break. You know, for example, that they've got technical evidence, what we call scientific evidence. They have physical evidence, and they also have live testimony evidence. So you have an idea of what's coming in, but you're not exactly sure how it's going to be received by the jury. So you don't want to say something or put yourself in a box. So you generally just start talking about how the burden is with the state. The defense doesn't have any obligation whatsoever. Remind the jury that they have an obligation to wait till they hear all the evidence before they deliberate or make any decisions. You sort of give sort of the general rules of the game as to how a jury is supposed to wait, hear all the evidence, and that the burden is always with the state.
So would you get up there and would you try to guide the jury to understand their role as a juror, and to reiterate to them that the prosecution must prove their case and that the burden rests with the prosecution? Or would
Absolutely.
you say, or would you say, you know what, the defense waives their right to, or reserves, the defense reserves openings?
Well, reserving the obligation to, reserving simply means that when the state rests, then the defense has their opportunity at that point to present an opening statement. But they can only present testimony of what they expect to be heard. They cannot use that as like a second closing. You can't use that to challenge what the prosecutor has just presented. You can only present what it is that you want to show. And there are times when you do reserve because, again, you, for whatever reason, aren't exactly sure what evidence you're going to actually be able to get in because there may be still some issues that the judge hasn't fully ruled on.
So I think in this case, the defense, they did reserve. So
Yeah.
They seem to have thought that strategically, there's not much to say after the prosecution's opening. I mean, it's a pretty compelling case. Wait and see. Let's reserve it. Let's see if they can prove it, and then they can drive it home later on to see if there's a possibility of a case. Right now, we're going to go into the courtroom, and we're going to listen to a witness testify. His name is Nathaniel Keck. Let's take a look and see what he has to say and why it's critical testimony. Welcome back. That is prosecution witness Nathaniel Keck, and he is explaining he's the gas station attendant at the BP, and he is explaining the circumstances around the situation, the final moments before the second victim, Stacey Stanley, went missing. With me, Gary Gerstenfield. Are you there, Gary? He's joining us on Skype. There you are. We're hearing this testimony. It seems like everything's fine. They went by the coffee pot. They're just chatting. No red flags. Saw them walk off together. What do you make of that?
Well, one of the unfortunate things about monsters is they rarely look like the monsters we think that, they actually should be. And this is a perfect example. When you see pictures of him, or you see him in the courtroom, he does not look like somebody that you should be naturally scared of. And he does have this ability, apparently, to be somewhat disarmingly polite and pleasant. He gives the impression that he is interested in what eventually his victims are interested in. He talks to the victim that survived about the Bible. He's able to ingratiate himself with these people.
It's like a Jekyll and Hyde.
All with an ulterior motive. I don't think there's a Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There is no good here. No, I don't think.
There's no good. I agree with that.
Yeah.
But he can play it off. I mean, like you said, the Bible, being to pretend he's in. I'm the good guy. I'm Mr. Nice. I'm into Bible study. Let's talk about God. And then
he's a true sociopath. He truly is.
So
he's one of these truly scary.
So he went on like a killing spree in a very short period of time, right? So is that common for
very brazen?
Is that common for a serial killer to, in a very short time period, go on this spree with no other known, while he's claiming 5 other killings, by the way, and there may be many more victims. But it seems to me that this happened, and it seems to the jurors and to the viewers that this happened in a relatively short period of time. Like something snapped inside of him, and he just like demons came out. I mean, is that a common trait for serial killers?
No. Your typical, when we talk about serial killers, generally what happens is they start off with a crime, for example, the Bay Area rapist, where he was raping women, but then as he was getting away with it and just the sexual assault itself got boring, so then he had to add on to get more of a thrill. He started killing people, and he started to mastermind his rapes and sexual assaults with greater detail and greater attention. In this case, this guy was very brazen and not particularly smart about it. For example, the reason why he was caught was because he was sound asleep with a cell phone nearby the victim, who was able to actually make a 911 call while she's in the same room with this guy. I mean, he's completely seems unaffected by the fact that what he's doing is as terrible as it is. It's almost as if he really simply didn't care about getting caught.
Yep, right. That's true. And it also, when we listen to the facts, and we've been watching it with the opening statements into the witnesses, we hear about how there were burglaries before this, that there were red flags before it escalated to these murders. There was an opportunity for the police to get involved and possibly apprehend him before these murders could have happened and these innocent victims were killed. We do need to throw to a quick break, but when we get back, we're going to go back into the courtroom with more testimony and have some more in-studio analysis to dissect this case. So stick with us. All right, so that is Detective Kim Mager of the Ashland Police Department. She's the one that actually interviewed and questioned the defendant, Shawn Grate, on these murders. Right now, they are discussing the murder of the second victim, Stacey Stanley. And with me is criminal defense attorney out of Maryland, Gary Gerstenfeld. You up there on the screen with me, Gary?
Absolutely. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I like seeing you on the screen so I can talk to you. He's on Skype, so in my ear it's not as real. So question, they just pointed out about how they seem to think it's important that he changed his story regarding the mace. Like first she was spraying him with mace, and then he couldn't see, and then he could see, and he changed his stories. Is that some sick way of claiming self-defense to strangle and kill her? Whether or not the mace was in his eyes and he couldn't see, or whether or not, I mean, why is that significant?
Well, I suppose when you're sexually assaulting somebody, obviously with the intent later to kill them, you don't want to get maced in the process. I don't know. I mean, again, what is the point of how he was maced, or that he's lying, or that he's being more deceptive about it? It's a flight of fancy. He's explaining himself. Before you're questioned by police, you're advised under Miranda rights that you have the right to remain silent. It always strikes me that people have the right to remain silent. Frequently, they lack the capacity. So
right, they don't know how to just shut up, right?
Yeah. So we're trying to parse out the logic in what he's doing, and the truth of the matter is, I think he's just entertaining himself. I think he just is enjoying telling the story, and by changing the detail, makes it sound a little more interesting. He'll change the detail.
So he's just having fun reliving it, and he might even be changing it to what he wished the outcome was, and how the narrative was, rather than how it actually was, because he's a sociopath and a narcissist and a liar anyway, right?
Right, exactly.
I mean,
exactly. And for him, I don't believe that reality. I do think that the duality of him is absolutely amazing. This idea that he can present himself socially correct, he can present himself as being a nice guy, while at the same time harboring these dark ideas, fantasies, and ultimately the acts that he commits. This is truly an evil guy.
Okay, we're going to have to throw to a quick break, but when we get back, we can continue this in-studio analysis and more discussion. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. That was Sergeant Jim Cox with the Ashland Police Department, and right there you were hearing him discuss how he found the body in the house, what happened when he walked into the house, the stench, the odor, he could smell it, the maggots, the flies, what he found, the pile of clothes, the trash, the hand. Gruesome facts. With me, Gary Gerstenfield, criminal defense attorney out of Maryland. Gary, are you there?
I am.
Hey, there you are. You're up on the screen. I don't know if you, can you see me? I could see you.
Of course.
Oh yeah, you can see me now? Okay. So we're going through the process. We already listened to the process this morning of one victim. I mean, this is a death penalty trial. How necessary is it to go through all the steps, step by step by step, of a second victim to reach a death penalty type verdict? Does the jury really need to hear this? Is this really necessary?
So what you're saying is what's the point? You're running up the score. I mean, clearly this is a death penalty case. Well, the purpose of a trial is more than just to prove somebody's guilt in a crime. It's also to give the family their closure and to make sure that what happened to their family member isn't forgotten or left out. When you're talking about something as terrible as the murder, abduction, sexual assault, and murder of a young woman, it's not just the impact to her, it's the impact to her family members, the people in the community. And it's really important that this story gets told, and it be told graphically. I mean, it's very painful for the family, but it is important that story be told. Right, okay.
It is painful. I'm not sure it gives them closure, but a verdict will definitely give them closure. It's probably the step-by-step it's so gruesome to hear these details of what was uncovered, and nobody wants to hear of a loved one found under those circumstances with no chance of survival. Right now we are in the Ohio case, Shawn Grate trial. We are discussing the second victim that went missing, Stacey Stanley. She was also raped like Elizabeth Griffith and murdered like Elizabeth Griffith. We are listening to the officer on the stand. It is Ed Staley, BCI agent. He was discussing what he uncovered when he came into the house, the smell, the trash, the clothes, the dead bodies, all of it. We're going to throw to a quick break. Stick with us, and we're going to, I just heard we're going to go to Ed Staley in the courtroom and listen to some of his testimony on more of what he uncovered while he was in the house. Welcome back. I'm Carissa Kranz. We are following closely the Shawn Grate trial out of Ohio. It's a death penalty case. It is a case where 3 women were victims. 2 of them abducted, raped, and murdered. The third, abducted, raped, and attempted murder. She escaped, and it is because of her heroic efforts in her escape that the other women were found. Right now, we are going through testimony with Ed Staley, the BCI agent. He is the one that found the bodies dead in the house. And right now he is discussing on the stand when he found Stacey Stanley's body. And he is going through the pile of trash. He is authenticating evidence. And he is discussing how he is systematically removing each item of clothing. With me is criminal defense attorney Gary Gerstenfield. Gary, you
Hey.
there? Hey, okay, so question. I know, I like to see you when I talk to you, and when there's a delay in the screen, I'm not sure I have you. He's on Skype for our viewers. All right, so why is it important for him to discuss each article of clothing and authenticate these images and this process? I mean, he found the body, and they know it's her, so why go through this process?
So in any case, there's a certain formality for the admissibility of evidence. The evidence has to be presented, and we have to preserve what's called the chain of custody. And essentially what that means is that even though, as you pointed out, we're kind of running up the score in this case because the evidence is so overwhelming, that evidence is only overwhelming if it's properly presented and it can be properly placed before the jury or published. And that requires the preservation of the chain of custody, meaning from the point where the evidence is first identified, what it is, how it was preserved, that it still is in the same basic condition as it was found, or if it's in a different condition, that has to be explained. All that has to be properly done for that evidence to be admitted, and then once admitted, it continues to, as you pointed out, run up the score.
Right, and they probably have to systematically remove each item because they are the first responders on the scene, and we really don't know all the facts yet, and it is possible that there could be other DNA or something else on that evidence that we would later uncover. You know, you never know, so I think it's important in all cases to just be very careful. Like we heard earlier, when they found the car missing, they locked the car immediately, and the reason behind that was to preserve the evidence because it's so easy to contaminate a situation and contaminate evidence. Right now, we still have more testimony from Ed Staley as he discusses how he uncovers the body, and he's going to continue to take us through that process, and we're going to continue to see pictures and listen to him preserve the evidence so it can be authenticated in court, and it is because he preserved the evidence properly that the evidence is being admitted in court right now in the form of pictures. Let's take a look. Welcome back. I'm Carissa Kranz. We are following closely the Shawn Grate trial out of Ohio. It is a death penalty case. We have 3 female victims. 2 of them were found dead. 1 of them escaped. This is a case of abduction, attempted murder, rape, gruesome details. Before the break, we were listening to prosecution witness Ed Staley. He is a first responder to the scene. He is the one who was walking us through finding the bodies, the decomposition, the flies, the maggots, the articles of clothing. With me, criminal defense attorney out of Maryland, Gary Gerstenfeld. Gary, before I let you go for the day, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about what it's like to be a responding officer to the scene and not know what you're going to see, and then be able to handle it responsibly and professionally so that everything is properly preserved for a trial by jury.
Yeah, it's absolutely critically important, particularly where, you know, you come across something as tragically and terrible as this, that the initial officers that show up are patrol officers. They show up to the scene, and when they see that it's something as serious as this, their first obligation, number one, is as in this case, to protect any individuals. And of course, the third person, the one that survived, the one that called 911, get her to safety, take the, in this case, take Mr. Grates into custody. Next thing they need to do, though, is absolutely preserve that evidence. They have to preserve the crime scene, and then the detectives can come in and do their investigation. But it's so important to stay calm and be professional and not react to what is probably the most horrific thing they'll ever see in their lives.
Absolutely. It is so important because too often cases are lost on a technicality or botched evidence or a bad investigation, and someone could get away with murder, or it could be claimed inadmissible in court because it wasn't handled properly. And even though it's good evidence and it's probative evidence, it may not be admitted evidence because the investigation was done wrong. So that's why we have to hear step by step by step how it is systematically uncovered and preserved at the scene, so a jury can now deliberate whether or not this man, this defendant, Shawn Grate, is worthy of a guilty conviction and then possibly the death penalty. We're going to continue with this trial and listening in to testimony, but now we're going to move into the third victim. Earlier today we had the first victim, Elizabeth Griffith. Then during my shift here, we've been discussing Stacey Stanley, the second victim. Both Elizabeth and Stacey, unfortunately, were found dead and were murdered allegedly by the defendant, Shawn Grate, and their bodies were uncovered in the house decomposing. But now we're going to move into the third victim, Jane Doe, who we're talking about. She survived. She, while laying next to him and he was asleep, unshackled herself, reached for the phone, called 911, accidentally set a taser off in between, by the way. He woke up briefly, but then he laid back down, and she heroically, under those circumstances, got the police to come on scene and enter this house of horrors, and she escaped. We're now going to move into that testimony. So let's take a look in the courtroom. Welcome back. That is prosecution's opening statements discussing the third victim in the Shawn Grate case. This is the death penalty trial out of Ohio. And right now, the prosecution is walking us through the third victim. We're calling her Jane Doe. She survived. And if you just heard and were listening in, he talks about how she survived and the psychological components behind her survival that gained his trust and confidence in her to allow her survival to be so heroic. He talks about how the first victim screamed and then was strangled and died. That was Elizabeth Griffith. Then he talks about the second victim, Stacey Stanley, resisted him. She maced him. She died. The third one, she acquiesced. She accepted her circumstances. She took off her clothes when she realized he was stronger than her and that her clothes were going to get ripped anyway. He folded them, he put the clothes in the corner, and then he proceeded to rape her. Orally, vaginally, anally, you're hearing those gruesome details. And she allowed it because when he went to try to strangle her, she realized he was going to win. So she accepted her circumstances, just like he gained her trust by reviewing the Bible Bible passages with her, getting her to come to his house after making sandwiches at her house. He gained her trust, and then she flipped the psychology on him to gain his trust for her own escape. With me is criminal defense attorney Gary Gerstenfeld, Maryland. Gary, are you? Yeah, nice to see you there. Can you explain to me this kind of psychology? I know you're a lawyer, but the psychology of a victim who's giving in to their aggressor, I mean, do they have a better chance of survival? Because in this case, that's what saved her.
You know, there's no clear answer on that. There are many theories that you should resist and fight back. Obviously, the two women that did died. This one didn't. She didn't fight back, and in fact, as you pointed out, gained his trust enough that he actually was sound asleep, and she was able to use his cell phone to summon the police who came and rescued her. So clearly she made the right call. You know, all I can say is that whenever...
The right call, 911?
Yeah, really. Right. You know, nobody can tell you, or nobody can predict exactly what it is that will help somebody survive in such dire circumstances. I think the important thing is, and the message I think for all of us is, keep your wits about you, don't stop thinking, and don't just fall apart. It's amazing when you listen to the 911 call as she's summoning help, how she's able to keep her voice down and keep clarity of thought, and is able to explain exactly where she is in relation to a laundromat, which is something that the police knew they're trying to find the house that she's at, so they're using reference points. She's able to calmly explain that while at the same time keeping her voice down and answering the questions of the 911 operator. That when you listen to that 911 call, which you guys have done just a wonderful job in preserving, and you listen to that 911 call, you come away with the fact that this is a very intelligent woman who truly kept herself together during a most trying time.
Right, and that's a great point. And I think another thing that's important to point out is when ordinary people become completely extraordinary under certain circumstances. In this case, she had nothing to lose. She was going to die. He told her she was going to die, and she knew that there were other bodies in that house and that there were flies. She had nothing to lose but to play his game and, like you said, keep your wits about you. She had to outsmart him, and she did. We're going to throw to a quick break, but when we get back, we're going to continue with more of Jane Doe's story and the prosecution's case, so stay with us. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. We are covering the Shawn Grate trial out of Ohio, the death penalty case. It's our main trial today that we are dissecting and analyzing. And right now, we have been going through testimony of the third victim in this case. Remember, this is the case where there were 3 victims. We spent the morning discussing Elizabeth Griffith. She was unfortunately found dead. Stacey Stanley, found dead. But the third one survived. Shawn Grate, the alleged monster, is standing trial right now for the abduction, kidnapping, rape, murder, and attempted murder of these women. With me is criminal defense attorney Gary Gerstenfield. Gary, I know you have to go, so before you do, I wanted to have some in-studio analysis with you about this final victim. And I wanted to ask you, before you go, how do you think the jury is taking this? I'm sure, they are keeping score, like you said. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to add anything else before you go that I may have missed in asking you that the viewers may want to hear to better understand this case.
I think one of the most challenging things for a jury is they have this duty to listen to all the evidence, and they have to wait until what they call deliberations before they can actually talk amongst themselves about what they're seeing. So they're taking all this very heavy evidence in, and they're not supposed to be talking about it. It's been my experience that jurors, for the most part, follow that. So to imagine, to listen to this woman tell this wrenching story, this very painful story, and say it as eloquently as she has, and then not to be able to talk about it, but rather to simply wait, and then wait and wait until finally you get to go in that jury room and deliberate. Can you imagine what that must be like, to be able to finally talk about what they're seeing and finally get a chance to unload some of this? It's very painful for the jury, very painful for all of us. It's been a very, very, very challenging case for everybody involved.
Right. And one thing that's, to note is that we're in the prosecution's opening statement, and they are going through the third victim who survived. She's alive. So the jury is hearing the story, the roadmap by the state, putting on their opening statement. But then the jurors now get to be teased of testimony that they're going to hear later from the victim who survived, from her own mouth, on what really happened. Right. And that will give much more insight into these other murders where their voice is forever silenced. We're going to go back into the courtroom for these opening statements, but Gary, thank you so much for joining us. I know you got to get back to the practice of law.
Always a pleasure.
So